Hello and welcome to the Design Journeys podcast. I'm your host, Chris Whyte, and in this podcast series, we explore the career journeys of design and engineering leaders from the world of physical product development. In today's episode, I'm joined by Michael König, a design leader with an incredible career spanning digital and physical design. From leading teams at Bang & Olufsen and Fiskars to founding his own consultancy, Michael has helped iconic heritage brands modernize through storytelling, rapid prototyping, and consumer-first strategies. If you're curious about how legacy brands can adapt to fast-changing markets while staying true to their roots, this conversation is packed with insights just for you. So let's get on with it. Michael, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Nice to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, it's great to have you. So we'll start at the beginning then, shall we, Michael? So perhaps if you could maybe give a brief introduction to yourself and where you are now, and then we'll just rewind the clock and where it all began, kind of pre-university, how you got into design, and maybe take us on a little journey.
Sure. Yeah, so my name is Michael. I have been in design my whole career, which is 20 years, coming on about 20 years. So it's been quite a journey. I actually started out in digital design and then moved into physical products. So I think I've had kind of a bit of a path that's a little different than a lot of other people I talk to. I mean, a lot of us tend to kind of sway our way through, find out as we're doing. And I don't know, I guess when I look back, what I've kind of found is that I have really jumped at big opportunities, at just like places that where I've been able to had some impact. And that more than anything has kind of led my career. I started out with my own studio, had that for about 10 years. Very much kind of what we called the strategic entertainment, we called it. It was very much kind of like games and animations and just having fun, but like always using it for a purpose. And I worked at a big publishing house after that in the innovation studio, trying to convert a lot of their big IPs that they had publishing rights to digital assets. And I mean, this sounds like it's a lot further back in time than it actually is, but this was before that there was something called UX, right? Which isn't that long ago, but it was a fun time. And then I ended up at Bang & Olufsen, the luxury speak audio company, and I ended up actually leading the design team there and the design research team for a couple of years, about 5 years I was there. And then I moved on to the Fiskars Group, which is a big Finnish conglomerate with where I oversaw a portfolio of 12 different brands.
That's awesome. And that kind of brings us almost up to date, doesn't it? So, yeah, and it's an interesting way that you've taken your career as well, Michael, because a lot of people, especially industrial designers that you speak to today, that maybe have been through some hard times with their kind of their jobs during COVID, maybe been laid off. A lot of them think, I'm going to upskill, I'm going to do UX, UI now, going from physical to digital. But you went the other way around, from digital to physical.
Yeah.
Like you say, kind of the early days of before we experienced things as users, then there became UX. So it's interesting, but I want to go back, if that's okay. And in terms of your studies and kind of your entry into design, where did that start? And was there a mission or was there a purpose? You know, some people fall into it. What was your path?
I actually think a lot of the big things that have happened in my career, I'd kind of say a bit I fell into it. I grew up traveling around with my parents. We lived in Mexico and the States. And I came back to Denmark to study. And I don't know if it's because I travel so much, but I've always had like an interest in people. That's kind of, I think, like a curiosity around people. That's probably one of the big drivers for a lot of the things that I did. And so I ended up just studying liberal arts, I think it's called in English,
Okay.
right? Like philosophy and literature and all these things. And after my bachelor, there was a new education called information architecture, which was basically digital, like another word for digital design back then. And I took that, and I think I took that because it sounded fun. It just, it really, and it was a new thing. And I think it was also a lot of like very kind of hands-on design courses, like building digital, websites and videos. And then that was just a super exciting thing. And it just kind of, it opened for me. And while I was there, I met an American guy, and we ended up starting our studio together. So
Oh, cool.
we built a big game for the Danish spaceship research center here, and they
Okay.
actually commissioned it afterwards, and we kicked off our studio like that and had it for 10 years.
That's awesome. So when you say game, can you tell us a little bit more about kind of what that first project was?
Yeah, it was, I think a lot of what we did was kind of to take games and use it to drive kind of either education or behavior. We worked a lot for like cultural institutions, people that had something to communicate that we thought were really interested in. We try to make entertainment around it. So try to make it fun to go to a museum or to learn about space education.
Yeah.
So
like the interaction stations that you might go, you're a museum and you play with the screen or the interactive thing on the wall.
Yeah, it could be that. It could be websites. So it was like before mobile phones, actually, right? So there wasn't any apps, but it was so it could be like the physical stations, and it could be a website.
Okay. Well, and so pretty brave move, kind of fresh out of university, starting a business. What was the business called?
It was called WeGame.
WeGate.
WeGame.
Yeah.
WeGame. W-E, like WeGame. Yeah. Yeah, it was I guess it was one of those things, and it's funny that you say it was brave. I think more of it as brave now, but back then it just felt like that was a great thing to do, and it's probably a better time to start off than it is kind of mid-career, because you don't have that. You're still kind of in your kind of university way of living and your costs of living are at that stage. So you can, it's much easier to start the studio at that time. And I think the first couple of years, we just had a bunch of fun. We were just worried about making really fun things. And in that sense, it was a great time in my career, because it was really about having a good time. And I think that came through in the products that we were doing. And we ended up building up a great portfolio like that.
Awesome. Was it just the two of you, or had you kind of assembled a team by the time it all kind of wrapped up?
Well, by the time, we had a nice team. We got a third partner in halfway through that was more experienced working agency side, so he could really help us with, there's a lot of things you have to learn by yourself that could, you could do the actual work, but how you operate and just like how you plan, all these things are hard to do if you have to invent it yourself. So I'd actually worked part-time or freelance at an agency, and he was my manager there. And when he quit, he came over and started kind of working a little for us on the side, and he ended up coming in as a partner. And we grew it, and I think we were about 5 full-time people by the time we stopped, and we worked with a lot of agencies, or outsourced to a lot of people, both in South America and Eastern Europe. So it was quite big like that. I think we probably about 20 people by that time.
So that's really impressive from from university days. And like you say, you're learning a lot as you go, aren't you? There's the benefit of starting when you're young is no overheads and not a lot to lose, but then you don't have the benefit of hindsight and learning. You're literally learning as you go and figuring it out, but bringing that experience in. Sounds like that was quite a shrewd move. So brilliant. So then you moved on to that went for about 10 years, did you say?
Yeah, that went on for about 10 years. Yeah.
And what led that to kind of you to moving on then, or did the business just kind of?
Yeah, I think we had that first kind of .com big crisis around there, and it just became tougher and tougher to get clients, and at one point we'd worked hard. I mean, we'd had so much fun, and then we'd had a tough year, and we were like, okay, either we need to just like downsize drastically and then build it up again, or we need to just kind of, call it quits and let that be that. And it was a hard decision because I think, if you have your own company for 10 years, you're good at not giving up, because there's many moments where you can't give up during 10 years. So you're like really good at just sticking your nails in there and fighting through. And I think at that point it was just, we talked about it and made sense, like to move on. And then what had happened was that we'd worked with a record studio to create like our own IP that we owned together with the record studio. Really fun, big universe for kind of like younger kids to learn about math and language. And that we ended up selling that to Egmont Publishing, which is one of, well, I think it's the biggest publishing house in Northern Europe. And so I'd kind of had contact with him that way.
So that worked out quite nicely then, didn't it? Because you spent a little time there working for them then, didn't you? Yeah.
Yeah.
How was that transition then from being a company owner and a founder to being an employee for this big company?
I think the unit that I was in was like a little innovation unit. So we were very much our own. I think, we're like early adopters of trying to figure out how you work in an agile way. Like we were about 10 people in that little unit. So it didn't feel like walking into a big corporate machine. We had quite a lot of freedom. So I don't feel like it was, I don't remember, I'm trying to think back, I don't remember it as a big shift. It was, I think I had, it didn't feel like, I think it felt exciting also. I remember it more like that because I got to work with, they owned big IPs like Disney and Hasbro and Mattel. So I got to work on kind of more big international projects. So that sense was fun, and there was a lot of freedoms. So in those projects.
That's really interesting. And I know we've only really started on talking about this journey so far, but you've done really well by the sounds of it in terms of kind of utilizing the network, kind of being agile and kind of taking a bit of a chance. And it's up to this point that we've got so far in your story. It's working out for you, isn't it? Like kind of being up for the challenge and just leaning in on that network. So that's great to see. And then you moved into UX, didn't you? After that, you took the job with Design It, before then moving on to Bang & Olufsen. So how was that transition for you then?
I think the transition to Design It, which was a very, again, super cool agency, very fun. They were really, really good at finding people. So their hiring principles were people. Just like, so it was just a really good bunch of people, very ambitious place, and also a lot of fun. So that was really fun. But that felt much more like walking into a big machine than it did at Egmont. So I think that's probably where it kind of hit me, because we were working with, it's like pension houses and banking and like really serious stuff. And I'd had by that time 15 years of fun and games, if you will. So that felt, but then that's actually kind of, because I could just see that kind of traditional UX, there were people there that had spent 15 years kind of going that way. So I'd never, that wasn't where I was going to position myself, or that wasn't when I was going to find my place. And I guess what I found out during that period is if I kind of take a little step back from the actual work and kind of help people do the work, or kind of lead the team a little more, then I can have a lot more impact like that. And so I think that's where I kind of got the first sense of leadership, or trying to lead instead of executing. So I think that was one of the big things that I took away. And I had some great people there that were willing to just jump out and try to work in these like short 1 week, 2 week sprints, and super fun.
Yeah. And that seems like that must have proven to be quite a pivotal moment in your career as well, because then It was the big one, wasn't it? Bang & Olufsen. It was after that. So how did you land that job? Because that one on paper it looks like that was a big jump up from where you were as a senior UX designer, but also you've gone to being kind of from digital to responsible for and research designers. So a bit of a pivot in terms of the skill set as well. So yeah, how did that come about?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think I've had still quite a few of those in my career. But I mean, the actual it kind of happened by itself because a guy that I kind of became friends with there, he had moved, industrial designer, he had moved to Bang & Olufsen. And then they were looking for somebody that had digital flair to come join the team. And so he had kind of popped up my name over there, and they gave me a call, and we went into conversations, and so that's how it started. And at that time it was the B&O Play. If you remember, there was they had the sub brand, which was kind of there to attract a younger audience. So they had a bit lower price points, Bluetooth speakers instead of the big stereo speakers. And so again, it was kind of a startup within the brand. Small, super agile team with its own supply chain, its own sales channels. And a small design team of, well, when I was there, including me, it was about 4-5 people. And so I came on to kind of tackle UX. So UX, because we were trying to build up digital assets to the actual speakers, right? So like a kind of physical digital product, and then also work on UX on the actual physical products. So that was kind of my role. And then the big mission that I was asked to do was try to see if I could actually turn digital into its own revenue stream or its own business. Like, can we turn this into a business? And I think after about a year, I had to go back to my manager and said, I've tried. I don't think it's not going to be easy. I don't know what to do next. I mean, I can keep going. I mean, I know how to keep going. I know how to try things out, but like, it's not easy. And I think in hindsight, it was Bluetooth speakers. There's not that much you can actually do. Yeah. But looking back, the whole industry was so excited about stuff back then. So that was kind of also a bit of like, how do I approach that situation, right? I've been here for a while now. I've worked on it. I've done some cool things, but I can see it's not going to go towards something that people will actually pay money for. They'll pay money for the product, the physical product. They're not going to pay. So I just kind of decided to say it like it was. And then all of a sudden, there was organizational changes. My manager was out all of a sudden. And then I was asked to step in and lead from there, a bit kind of, I would say, suddenly. And so I did that then later on, design research. And I did that, I think it was about 3 or 4 years.
Okay.
There, and obviously that was again a very big shift, right? That's a huge shift. So for me again, it was about leaning more on my leadership skills than my hardcore industrial. Well, I didn't have a big baggage of industrial design skills, so it was much more about design in general and about people, and about also making sure that we were building the right type of products the right way. So very much kind of focusing on getting the briefs right, making sure that we had great empowered teams. And there were some great people there. And I think, I guess because I've because I've jumped so much and I've wanted to, I guess, like I said, I'm pretty driven by my curiosity, and I've been lucky enough to have that lead me a long way. I also learned that it's not my job to be the best designer. Right. My job is to help other people be the best designers in the room, and then have a lot of rooms with the best designers in there.
Yeah.
And so that kind of really opened up for the leadership path for me.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's, playing on people, and the curiosity is is a fantastic attribute to have in many careers, let alone design. I think, like say, yeah, once you get to a certain level, it's not about kind of what you're doing, is it? It's about it's more about how you're facilitating others to shine and what they bring to the tables.
It is. And then I think, at the same time, absolutely world-class products being made, right? I mean, these are exceptionally beautiful products, and it was very talented people, and also a very interesting time because it was literally a time of disruption. So there was a lot of having to find out how we were going to navigate because all of a sudden voice came out, and so I think back at Amazon, Apple launched speakers, but in a very different kind of business model, right? Because they were selling really cheap hardware, but looking to collect data. So all of a sudden, competition was really different, and Wi-Fi just became a commodity. Everything had Wi-Fi. Where Bang & Olufsen invented the multi-room experience, and that whole technology was something that Bang & Olufsen, I mean, not in my time, but that's something that Bang & Olufsen invented. And all of a sudden we were getting challenged on technology, and technology became such a big part of the products that were long, these were luxury products that are long lasting, but all of a sudden technology is moving so fast that it's kind of questioning the whole proposition. So what was really interesting, I think, about, being inside companies in those moments is just, it's hard to make decisions. It's hard to figure out what the right thing to do is, right? When you're in it, it always seems easier when you look back. And I think we had probably gotten to a point where it was just difficult to know exactly how we were going to move forward. And then I simply just asked if I could just assemble a cross-functional team and just go do very simple explorations, like just try to build a new portfolio of speakers, cardboard, just like really simple, just try to figure out what does it need to look like. And the funny thing was we rented an Airbnb for 3 days, and we built a bunch of prototypes. And it was like marketing, engineering, a lot of design people. I forgot if there were some other functions, but more or less kind of that. And we built that, and then we just had a bunch of people come by, and we were just kind of testing and playing around. And after 3 days, before we went into those 3 days, there were so many discussions about ideas about how to move forward that was what was kind of keeping us from actually acting, right? And just kind of going through that 3-day process together, everybody kind of came out with a different point of view, but everybody more or less agreed. And after that, we just set a path and we executed on that for 2 years straight. So I think that was one of the big things I take away from that, is just how important the momentum is. You don't know exactly what the right thing is, but you keep moving forward. And that's a much better way to learn and to adjust, and you're swaying your way through, but what you can't do is stop up and think too much about what you're going to do next. I think that was a really good experience.
That's really interesting. I love the Airbnb bit as well. Like, I imagine most Airbnb owners, kind of people who rent the houses out, they think, they worry about these kind of groups of guys coming in and having house parties, and there you are bringing bits of cardboard and prototypes to have a wild 3 days.
It was fun.
I'm interested because I'm reading the Simon Sinek's book. Start with Why. I think it's called. I'll get corrected in the comments and stuff. But just interested in that. So Bang & Olufsen, obviously this famous brand, but was the why kind of communicated in all of this, of kind of the purpose and the direction? Because you mentioned it felt like a bit of kind of, let's try some stuff out and feel our way. But was there an overarching purpose or why to all that?
Yeah, I think the why, the why was to make again, really beautiful products that blend into the home, right? So really make audio, make tech that blends into the home. By now, where the big temp companies have also done that, that seems like a normal thing to do, but it wasn't. It wasn't a normal thing to do, not even back then, because they hadn't really got into that space of kind of domesticating tech products were very techy back then. So I think that was it. I guess the why is a bit like we had an empty category. We had to build, we had several older products in this kind of Wi-Fi mono speaker category, bit of one-offs, great pieces, but we had to kind of think that portfolio. And at that time, there was B&O Play, which had one approach, kind of the fast moving little startup. You had that time 80-year-old mother company that had, been there and done this so many times. There was very different opinions about how to do things. And those discussions slowed us down, if you will, or like we kept in that intellectual space instead of moving forward. And so I think it was just about finding those like right product ideas that just made sense in that new space. And it wasn't a brand new why, but I think when you're discussing it, when you're like intellectually discussing it, it can feel like you're discussing the big why. But when you just start moving, things were less complicated. So it was just kind of picking that speed up.
Yeah.
If that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. That's awesome. Did you ever feel like, kind of, obviously you've made quite a few pivots through your career, or kind of you've been very adaptable, but it sounds like the move from kind of within Bang & Olufsen was quite a big one.
Yeah.
Do you ever feel like out of your depth, or feel like, oh crikey, why have I said yes to this?
So many times. A lot of times. Yeah, a lot of times. And I think you have to be humble to make those pivots, right? Because you learn you're not the best person. There's a lot of things that you're not. There's so many other people that are really great at what they do because they focused for their whole career, right? And so it's just you're good at different things, right? So they'll be very good at more of a narrow thing, and I'll be better at a more general approach. So you have to be humble. Honestly, I really get excited about learning something new. So I try to be very honest when I go into those situations. I don't lie about what or exaggerate what I can and can't. I'm comfortable with doing something new, but I know it's going to take some time. But by now I've done it enough times that I know that I'm pretty good at going into new situations and building some knowledge, building teams, getting people together, setting a vision, and getting people to move, getting us all to move forward. But I think more than anything, it's accepting that you're not the expert in all those things. And for some people, I think that can also become a strength as a leader.
Yeah, massively. Did you get to a point where you felt like, okay, I know what I'm doing now. I've got this. I think a lot of people recognize that at certain stages in their career where they kind of something happens at work or kind of in a project where like it just clicks. You don't have to think too much about what you're doing now. It's just working. Do you have any moments like that?
Yeah, I have. I'm trying to think. Because it kind of feels, I think looking back at my CV, it is kind of these 5-year jumps more or less, right? So it's a couple of years in to each of those. There's a moment like that, and probably for at Bang & Olufsen, it was probably building some systems, putting some structure around me, getting a cadence of how we do things, because so it's not both kind of the content and how we do everything is moving at the same time. Because then I think I can kind of lean a little back into that and then just kind of focus on the actual work. So I've also kind of like to just build some nice kind of structure and some process so that's kind of out of the way. So I think that's kind of, that was a big moment. And then it was a lot about also focusing on, actually kind of building kind of the design briefs and figuring out what it was that we were actually going to be working on. That was kind of a mix of where I could play to my strengths as well and support teams in the right way. So I kind of dived a little as well. We set up a pretty cool process actually where we had fixed Airbnb in China, London, and New York. And then once a month, we would do one of those sessions. And I'd bring a cross-functional team with me, and we would together prototype, have people come in, play around, and we would write the basis of the brief together. And it was design, market, business, and product development. Kind of obviously not writing it together, but still, I would say writing it together. At the end of the day, business would kind of own it. We would own the design brief, but we were kind of doing it together, and we were creating those user experiences. We're trying to what is it that we're actually trying to do for the users? And that would kind of become a common language throughout the project. People would keep going back and referring to those moments when they're trying to figure out how to solve certain things. And that kind of, when that kind of was up and rolling, that felt like one of those moments.
Are you frustrated by drawn-out recruitment processes, missing out on talent to your competition, or wasting time interviewing candidates who don't quite live up to their profile? If you're the founder or leader of a physical technology brand or design consultancy, here's what we can do for you. By working closely with you and your team, Kodu will help you improve your entire existence of hiring. We'll make it easier to identify, attract, and ultimately hire the very best design and engineering talent ahead of or from your competition. You'll only interview candidates who fit the brief, and we'll work with you to ensure you get the outcome you want in a timely manner, which is typically within 6 weeks or less. We have a 100% fill rate, and we guarantee to get you a positive outcome. If we don't deliver, you don't pay. But how can I make such a claim? Well, the short answer is I've been doing this for a very long time now. Our process at Kodu is built from over a decade of my own personal experience recruiting within physical product design and development. I've hired hundreds of designers, engineers, managers, and leaders in that time, over 97% of whom are still in post after 12 months. On top of that, I've personally built an incredible network of thousands of professionals in the physical product design and engineering space, covering the UK, US, and Europe. And I've taken what I've learned over the years and put the best of that into Kodu. So if you'd like to spend less time stuck in a recruitment loop and more time doing what you love, get in touch. Email chris@teamkodu.com or message me on LinkedIn. But for now, let's get back to the show.
One of those moments.
Yeah. Brilliant. No, thank you for sharing that. So yeah, you moved on then from, actually before move on, I want to just dig down again onto the Airbnb. I'm obsessed with this one. So just curious, the Airbnb kind of strategy, especially when you kind of had it at various places, was that, could you not do that internally, or was it a conscious decision to take it off site and I guess make it an occasion, or what was the thinking behind doing it off site?
We would pick the sites depending on the key market for the product. So those were our key markets. So it was also a great way to bring that kind of voice of the consumer alive inside the company, because people came home and have had real kind of eye-opening experiences. They would go in thinking one thing and they would come out thinking something else. And in the team, people were talking about, why, remember we said that lady, we gave her this prototype, we thought she was going to put it like this or turn this button, and then she didn't, and then we moved a button over here, and then the next person knew exactly what to do. And those kind of become stories. And then over the years, everybody on the team had been on these things, on these trips. And so we were all talking about those stories, and I think it was a great way to do it. And I think, what we tried to do is really take some of those stories and use for a brief, like a speaker that you can put in your basket, like in your bike basket, and ride with 2 or 3 people while you're listening to music. That's like a very specific like that could be a brief almost, like very kind of story driven. And, we would make real prototypes and we'd go out and ride our bikes and see, because like, okay, it needed to be durable enough to be lie in a basket and kind of shake around. It needed to be loud enough that three people can actually hear. Those are things that you can test very, very in a very smart and fun way. You just go out and ride on
Yeah.
your bike. So I mean, yeah. So the reason to do that was really actually, yeah. So it's kind of a story went a little further, but it was to get to know the markets and try to pick up stories. And obviously for us, China was quite exotic, particularly in the beginning. It's just, so there was a lot to learn, both for design, but certainly for business and marketing as well. So
Wonderful.
those were great trips.
No, that's fascinating. It's yeah, super insightful as well. So Fiskars Group then was the next move, and you've gone from one kind of heritage brand to and trying to innovate in there, and then kind of joining a group of 12 heritage brands, and a departure from kind of technology through to kind of homeware brands. I think is that correct?
Yeah.
So what was the mission there then?
Yeah, so I came in a new position as the VP for design and product development across the portfolio of 12 brands. And so there's both the big kind of mother brand, Fiskars, which makes the tools. That was in another division. The part that I was in which had about, we're about equal in revenue, but this was 12 brands. And I think coming from England, you'll know Wedgwood, I imagine.
Yes, it's very local to me.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Stoke-on-Trent. So Wedgwood, Waterford, coming from Scandinavia. It's Georg Jensen, Royal Copenhagen, Itala, Raustein, Arabia. So these amazing brands built on, material innovation, craftsmanship, literally like, fire burning as you're blowing
Yeah.
glass and it's just a super fascinating brand. And I would say the mission is, I'm thinking a little bit, because I think it's one of those things also going into a new position like this, you kind of have to invent it halfway yourself. But obviously I was hired because my manager felt that, we needed to elevate design. And we also needed to try to figure out how do we then leverage design in a portfolio company? How do we use that across so many brands? So the mission really, I was just pretty much being challenged with just how do we do it? What should we do? Well, and it was a lot of, it was hard work. It was a big thing to figure out, right? Because these brands are 200-300 years old, so they're complicated. They have their own supply chain. They have their own history. They have their own culture. So at the beginning, I guess I was trying to figure out, what is the thing to do? But then I found out there isn't a thing, because everything is so unique, which then led me to this is going to be a very hard job, right? Because then I have
Yeah.
then I have 12 jobs now. So again, it was a bit of this not trying things out, but I think going back, the first thing I did was try to streamline some work process, which makes sense on paper. And then I would kind of go from brand to brand, work with the team, try to just get some great structure up, have some efficiency, make sure that we were elevating creativity, all the good things. But by the time I'd gone through the 12 brands and I came back to the first one, for 100 different reasons, things had just kind of gone back. Nothing had really changed. And I had to do that loop a couple of times to figure out that is not really how I can drive change. And so I went to what I kind of call the lighthouse approach. And we went all in on one brand. And I think the mission was, first, if you kind of see what was happening in that industry, which I think, is kind of provoking some of the change that was needed. This is beautiful, exceptionally crafted, storied, homeware, beautiful stuff. But I think what I see, we saw it a bit at Bang& Olufsen, I see it in a lot of other industries. There's just these big companies delivering great value for money, great design at low price, right? And so a lot of companies are getting challenged, right? And I think you can, IKEA, Sarah, all these kind of companies are challenging a lot of the bigger brands in terms of just literally value for money. And you can go out. And I had this one slide where I'd found a blue plate in some kind of, I'd gone to a store to buy a plant for my sister-in-law, and they had plates there. And so I had to take a picture, and it's like, this one cost $2. The one that we sell cost $150. There has to be a very, very good reason for that price, right? And we have all that reason. And it's a lot of the same reasons that people buy beautiful watches, beautiful clothes. It is beautiful bags. It's the craft storied kind of luxury proposition. And so the mission really became to elevate the brand and to elevate the craftsmanship of the products, to kind of move away, to really differentiate ourselves even more. And so the way, so I think my steps was, I was in the executive leadership team. So really kind of, first of all, there's a new situation, business environment or business driven environment, and kind of get to formulate my ideas, my vision, and a plan in a way where I could get buy-in from the business side, because it takes time and it takes investment to make these kind of changes.
I imagine it's a really challenging kind of environment to be in for someone who likes change and is curious and likes to innovate. I guess coming from even Bang & Olufsen as a heritage brand or legacy brand, they're still a technology brand, so they're almost forced to innovate to keep up. Whereas, companies like Wedgwood, been around for hundreds of years. It's like the products that were coming off the production line 100 years ago aren't that much materially different to the ones that come off the production line now in some categories, I suppose. And
absolutely.
And it's a very, very traditional business, but you've always been around innovation, and yourself have had to change from kind of digital print, kind of UX, UI through to kind of physical and CMF, and now a product that doesn't have any technology in it. So where do you innovate? I mean, that must have been tremendously challenging as a problem to solve.
Absolutely. And I think at the beginning, I talked about innovation, and looking back, I talked about innovation because that was kind of for me a word of like, let's change things. And I think people laughed. How are you going to innovate? That plate has been like that for the last hundreds of years. What are you going to do? And I had a bunch of ideas, and then over time, I'm like, okay, maybe that's not how we innovate. Maybe I understand why but still, it kind of becomes, the problem was real, right? The problem was real, which was that the market was changing. So, and consumers were getting older. And so there was a business problem that had to be solved. And design was a big part of that solution, because there's kind of two paths you can go. You can kind of win on price, or you can win on kind of brand and craftsmanship and just like classical design, really making beautiful, storied, well-crafted products. That's one way to win. The other way is to, go to some wholesale channels and win on price and try to, put out a lot of volume. And so that's kind of how I put it up, that those are the two choices to make. And I think the competition on price will be fierce. And a lot of those brands most brands don't have a big chance, don't have what it takes to compete at that very high kind of luxury position. We do. We have that ticket. It's in the DNA of every single brand in our portfolio. So that is the journey that we need to go on. And so obviously not innovation, but a big change, a transformation would be a better word. And then you can say, well, I do think, well, if I just kind of let me get back to innovation one sec, because I think there is an innovation story in there. what I kind of that was kind of my main. It became a transformation story, and it was driven by really, I would say, driven by design, right? It was about building a brand through exceptional products and bringing craftsmanship back to life and elevating that and getting the storytelling right. And so I needed to build. It's kind of back to how do I bring all these brands, how do I build momentum across so many brands? And I think the first thing was to build a really strong leaderships in the brand, design leadership in the brand. And so I went out and I got to hire some really great people from the luxury fashion industry because I thought we're so good at building. We know our material better than anybody else in the world. We can craft these better than anybody else in the world. What we want is somebody who's exceptionally good at storytelling it, right? And because we're so good at the materials, we can actually try to do something a little different and bring in design leadership that doesn't know the material, but that knows how to bring our crafts and stories alive. And that's what fashion was so good at. So I thought if we can kind of mix those two worlds, I think we could have something unique. And so we kind of we built some creative director roles, and we got people like great people from Burberry, J.W. Anderson, Alexander McQueen,
Cool.
Arquette, people that were used to building big story-driven collections. And so I think so that was the first kind of part, because then when I did that, when I had started having these people and also bringing in a couple of extra people, we had these teams with strong leadership, with a mix of this kind of new story-driven approach, mixed with these great designers and product developers that had been around for a lot of years and knew how to make product. And then that's where I wanted the magic to happen across those. And so then the next step, where I would say the innovation, came in, it was more about how do we bring products to life and how do we bring products to market, if you will, like the operating model of it all. Because that's something that we can. So we kind of redid what we called from idea to shelf. We kind of broke all the rules. We broke everything that we had done. We set up cross-functional teams. So with different work streams, working on different parts of the strategy, and then building big collections that could be driven by stories. And then we could have a lot of different products in that. And that was a project I had together with supply chain and digital, which was such a strong, right? So with the VP of digital and the the VP for supply chain and the EVP of digital. So it was a really good team. Like we could actually make change all the way from how products are briefed to how they're made. And we managed to reduce time to market for up to 50%, which I think is incredible. And this has been one of the big pain points that my manager had talked to me, is like, why are we so slow? And when I talk to other people, it's like, well, it's a delicate craft. And so again, being surrounded by people that know more about things than me, what I knew is that how long it took us to make a sound bar in Bang & Olufsen.
Yeah.
And it was more or less the same amount of time needed to make a new teapot.
Yeah.
And I knew that
yeah, you need to be fast, didn't you? Because that's fashion. Fashion changes, and if you're going down a fashion-led approach, absolutely. But yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah,
making a
and I won't. Oh, sorry.
I was going to say, interesting that it's a similar amount of time to make a teapot as opposed to a soundbar as well.
Yeah, this is a soundbar that works with Google and Apple and is, a category defining. So I just want to pick up, because sometimes when I tell the story, people are like, "Oh, you were just becoming a fashion house. You're just trying to be fast fashion or something." And I say, that's not what we were trying to do, right? I just want to because I think that the story can sometimes get misinterpret it. What we're trying to do is elevate storytelling. That's what we were trying to do, is bring up storytelling. The other thing what we're trying to do is de-risk new product entry, because if we bring down the risk, then design could have a bigger power to try out new things. So I think those were really the two big things that we were trying to do. Bring it to speed, bring out products at speed, but then also bring out small batches, see what happens in the market, and then ramp up or not, depending on how it happens. But that means you can take a lot more chances. And so you're moving along kind of one collection at a time, really kind of building that new brand in the market, one collection at a time.
You're creating, early adopters, you're creating limited supplies, kind of scarcity, kind of bit of FOMO as well amongst the kind of the dedicated kind of fan base. It's not a bad way to go about it, really.
No, and I think what we were trying to do, and I've seen this, and so is not have stock sitting around for years.
Yeah.
Right, because what I wanted to get away from is this idea of three designers going into a room and coming out with the world best idea and then spending 2 years developing it, putting it into market, and then figuring out that the competition came out with something half a year ago, or the price isn't right, and I've seen, just like we've had great hits, in different places I've been to. I've also been parts of what I thought were going to be great hits, but ended up on shelves. And that's what I wanted to avoid. I wanted to, again, like I said, I wanted it to be a low risk to try something new.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Well, should we move on, because I'm conscious of time? So I want to talk about kind of what you're up to now. So obviously the Fiskars journey finished relatively recently, and then since then you've kind of gone full circle. You've launched a new studio, haven't you? So perhaps you could tell us about kind of that and how your today, I guess, has influenced that, and kind of tell us a story around that.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so it is full circle. And what I think I did is, looking back, I've been at a 100-year-old publishing home, a publishing house, Bang & Olufsen, which is coming close to 100 years. These brands at Fiskars, I've been in these storied companies for so long, and I think most of my career, and I can see that a lot of them struggle with the same things. But a lot of these heritage brands are struggling with the same things. And what I want to do is I want to build a studio where I can take all that knowledge I have of going into these companies and helping them transform and helping them modernize, and mixing it with that digital background I have, which is more that agile approach, which I kind of grew up with when I started my career, and then trying to mix those two to help heritage brands modernize. So that's kind of the story. That's kind of how I want to leverage everything that I've spent my career on. And when I look out across Europe, the other day I kind of Googled what are the 20 biggest, was an AI prompt, what are the 20 biggest companies in Europe, and what is the average age, or how long have they been around? The top 20 companies have been around for an average 90 years. So I think in Europe, we have so many of these companies, and of course those are big ones, but so many of them that are struggling with some of these same fundamental issues. So that's what we're trying to tackle.
I wonder how many of those companies are still family owned or have some link to the original ownership, because I was at IFA in Berlin last month, and the amount of heritage brands or kind of what that you'd associate with kind of especially great British or European design that are now owned by some company out in China was breathtaking, really. It was hard to decipher. I mean, it's quite a shrewd move for those Chinese companies, because the Chinese market loves the made in Britain or kind of the made in Europe kind of tag. But it'd be quite an interesting one to look into there. I might run that search myself if you share the prompt with me afterwards. But brilliant. So early days with your new studio. Has it got a name yet? Have you gone live or?
I mean, I've gone live in the sense that I have built a kind of my own site for myself. I don't even have a name yet. I do have work, which is nice, but I don't have a name yet. So right now it's mostly just kind of running through my LinkedIn, and pretty soon it'll have like I'll give it a real name. But right now it's really been picking up these early clients, and it's been around. Also, taking a little bit of time to reflect, because this is 15 years of work of trying to find those bigger themes that are there to kind of make sure that I understand and can formulate those issues that I know a lot of these brands are struggling with. I have a link to my site on LinkedIn. I have a link to my website's portfolio site where I have some of my work.
We'll share that on the show notes, that's for sure. And maybe by the time this episode goes live, then the company might have a name, so we can can definitely push that out on social. But if it hasn't, perhaps we could encourage people to maybe message into the podcast with some suggestions for you. But whether you'd be welcome to that or not, I'm not sure. But wonderful. Well, look, we're kind of coming up to time, but I always ask everyone, mainly from a selfish point of view, because it's helping my Audible list get a bit longer. But are there any books or podcasts that you're listening to that you'd like to share at the moment?
I mean, I always like Rick Rubin, the record producer. He's great. He has a great book out. He's he's such a good thinker. And I feel like when you read his stuff or you hear him talk, it's always so simple. It's almost like, I kind of knew that, but it's so inspiring that I keep thinking about those little quotes that he does. And there's something fascinating about a guy that spent his whole life being quiet in a record studio, just kind of listening and helping. So he has a great podcast called Tetragrammaton, where he does like a really long, like 2.5 hour interviews with all kinds of different people. So that I think is that's worth checking out. And I mean, I do read like design books every now and then. I used to read a lot more, I think, but I'm trying to pick it up again. And I'm reading one now called Design in Context by Todd Brasher, an American. Super cool. It's a framework for strategic differentiation. It's called super smart. Really, I think he worked at Tom Dixon for a lot of years.
Okay.
And he had actually lived in Denmark for a couple of years when he started his career. And that's definitely worth a read. Absolutely.
Awesome. I'll check that out. And you're my last guest mentioned the Rick Rubin's latest book as well. So there's a good omen. 2 guests in a row that have cited Rick Rubin as influences. So love it.
Yeah.
Well, brilliant. Well, look, I'll share all these links on the show notes, and I'm sure if anyone wants to reach out to you, I'll share your LinkedIn on the show notes as well, and obviously post about it on LinkedIn. But it's been absolutely wonderful having you on the show, Michael. Thank you again for giving your time and for joining us, and looking forward to following your kind of continued journey with the new studio. Thank you again.
Thank you, Chris. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for tuning in to this episode of the Design Journeys podcast. I hope you found it insightful and inspiring. If you did, please consider sharing it with a friend or colleague who might enjoy it too. And don't forget to subscribe so you never miss an episode. Before I sign off, just a quick note from me. Besides hosting this podcast, I'm also the founder of König, a recruitment business that specializes in physical product development. We help startups, established brands and consultancies find top-tier mechanical design and development talent, often in as little as 6 weeks. At König, we're all about providing an outstanding experience, with our clients and candidates consistently rating us plus 88 on the Net Promoter Score, or NPS, which is world-class in recruitment. Oh, and I should probably mention we have a 100% fill rate too. The inspiring people I've met over the years in consumer electronics, e-bikes, medical devices and beyond have been the reason behind creating this podcast. If you'd like to know more about Kodu and how we can help your business, feel free to visit teamkodu.com or connect with me, Chris Whyte, on LinkedIn. Thanks again for listening. See you next time.